Great to be here. So I'm going to be talking to you today about my field area, which is the Suru Valley, and it's located in the Zanskar Himalaya. So we know that the collision between India and Asia began somewhere around 50 to 55 million years ago. And the result of this is the formation of the high-grade metamorphic core of the Himalaya, and this is known as the Greater Himalayan Sequence. So this is shown on this map here in pink. So the GHS is bound to the northeast by the South Tibetan Detachment, which I've now highlighted in white. This is a normal fault, and the GHS is bound to the southwest by the main central thrust. So what you'll notice along strike of the Himalaya as we continue to central and eastern Himalaya is that the South Tibetan Detachment appears to define this boundary between the GHS and the THS, which is the Tethyan Himalayan Sequence, shown in yellow. However, this is not always the case. So my field area, which is the Suru Valley, highlighted here, will show something differently, which we'll come on to later in the talk. So one of the cool things about the GHS, so it records Peruvian metamorphism, but it's dominated by Oligocene to Miocene ages. So this is interesting because it contrasts with the early Eocene age we have for continental collision. So in part, the reason for this is that the GHS throughout much of the Himalaya equilibrates late in the orogenic cycle. So that's under higher temperature, lower pressure conditions, so sillimanite-grade. And because of this, it overprints much of the early collisional orogenic processes. So really our understanding of how the continental crust thickens. So my field area, the Suru Valley, is unique because it provides a really nice exposure from low to high grade of Peruvian metamorphic rocks with widespread lower temperature and higher pressure, i.e. kyanite-grade conditions. So we've got a large structural thickness of kyanite-grade peelite and semi-peelite. So this is great because really it gives us an understanding to the early history of the origin. The Suru Valley is also the location of a warped or sort of folded isograd pattern in map view. So on the right here, I've shown a map from Searle and Rex in 1989. And in red here, I've highlighted the isograd pattern. So it's the Peruvian isograd pattern. And what you'll see is, as I said, that it's broadly warped or folded. And so this was used and led to the formation of their folded isograd model as an explanation for both right way up and inverted metamorphic isokrads. So I've completed about sort of 3.5 months in the field in the Suru Valley, and this is one of my maps from the area. So you'll see with this little map of India here, I'm located in the northwest. And I'm going to now just highlight to you some of the key features on this map. So in black, I have the location of the normal fault, which is the Zanskar Shear zone. So this is the local term for the South Tibetan Detachment, the normal fault. And I've got kind of two key outcrops on the west and east of this area. And in red here, I've got the Peruvian metamorphic isokrads from low grade to high grade. And so what you notice about these isokrads is that across much of the mapped area, they are broadly sub-parallel to the lithostratigraphy and to structures defining the regional fabric. However, if we move over to the western side of the mapped area, particularly following this garnet isograd, is that you would notice sort of local discordance to the lithostratigraphy and the regional fabric structures. So it's not refolded by large-scale folds which define the formation of the regional fabric. So there's 4 main deformation events in the Suru Valley, and I'm just going to show you some field pictures here that sort of characterize these different events. So firstly, we have a S1 fabric, which you see forms sub-parallel to S0. Subsequent refolding and shearing of S1 results in the formation of our S2 fabric. So on the right here, we've got isoclinal folding of our S1 fabric. And this isoclinal folding of S1 we can see at both meter scale and at kilometer scale, which is really nice. So you're seeing the more muddy domains of this top photo here, the S2 fabric we can see is penetrative. And this top photo here, we've got one of our outcrops of the Zanskar Shear zone. And what we see in the left of the image is isoclinal folding of our S2 fabric, and subsequent reactivation results in the formation of this S3 fabric. And so as we move closer to the Zanskar shear zone, this S3 fabric becomes dominant, and you'll see that it's nicely aligned to the structure. And finally, we have D4, which is characterized by F4 folds, which are open and kilometer scale. And so these refold the previous fabric. And so this table here is just summarizing basically what I've said over the last few field photos. And the key thing just to emphasize going forward is that the S2 fabric and the D2 event is our regional fabric. So let's have a look now at how some of the growth of peak mineralogy relates to this S2 fabric. So we've got examples here from some metasedimentary rocks from low grade to high grade. And I hope what you can notice here is that at all metamorphic grades, we see examples of the peak mineralogy growing syn to post tectonically with respect to this S2 fabric. So I think this is nicely shown here by the staurolite and the kyanite porphyroblast. So you can see there's no real warping of this biotite mica, which is defining our S2 fabric. So if we have a look now as well at some of the metavolcanic rocks, we can see similar such relations. So with the actinolite and the hornblende here, they appear to both define and to cross-cut the S2 fabric. So again, I've got another nice little table here just summarizing what I've been through. So the key thing here to note is that as we go up metamorphic grade in both our metasedimentary and in our metavolcanic rocks, that we get increased growth of our porphyroblasts syn to post D2 event. And so the reason that this is interesting is if we now look at some of the literature from the central and eastern Himalaya, what we would see is that the growth of the peak mineralogy is dominantly pre to syn tectonic with respect to the main regional fabric in their respective areas. And so what we can now infer for Zanskar and the Suru Valley is that the thermal peak appears to outlast the deformation in the core of the GHS. So this is one unique factor of the Suru Valley. Another one is that fabrics associated with the Zanskar shear zone, which are our S3 fabrics, show normal sense shearing. And this contrasts with the main regional fabric, our S2 fabric, which shows thrust sense shearing. And so the normal sense shearing overprints thrust sense. So previous work by Finch et al. In 2014 constrained this switch from thrusting to normal movement to occur sometime between 26 to 22 million years. And so this work was done further to the southeast towards Padum. And by 20 MA, movement on the Zanskar shear zone had ended. So I'm going to show you a few field photos now, just constraining the switch between thrust and normal sense shearing. So this first field photo here is indicated by the location of this red dot on the map. And what we see is top to the southwest, thrust sense shearing. And this next red dot indicates a location where we see both normal and thrust sense shearing in the outcrop. And this next photo here shows top to the northeast sense shearing, so normal sense shearing associated with the S3 fabric, and we see some nice calc-silicate algae there. And the final red dot on the right-hand side indicates the location of the Zanskar shear zone. So if we now extrapolate between the extent of normal shearing here, this is about 4 to 5 kilometers in map view. So again, this contrasts with what we would see elsewhere in the Himalaya, particularly in the central and eastern Himalaya. So if we went, what would happen is that normal sense shearing tends to go down towards the mid-GHS. And so this observation in other areas of the Himalaya has been used really to inform various exhumation models. So as I said at the beginning of the talk, is that the STD, or the Zanskar shear zone, defines the boundary between the GHS in the footwall and the Tethyan Himalayan sequence in the hanging wall. And so this is nicely what we see in the eastern section of my mapped area. However, if we now go to the western section towards Sanku, what we see is a slightly different relationship. So on the footwall, we have deformed metavolcanics that are intercalated with some of the metasedimentary rocks of the GHS. And on the hanging wall, we have undeformed Dras volcanics. And so the Dras volcanics are part of the Dras arc. And this was active from around 160 to 80 million years, with the sort of peak of activity between 105 to 95 million years. So this Dras arc forms part of the Dras-Nindown terrain. And there's a little schematic in the top right here, where we see this Dras-Nindown terrain being thrust over the Indian passive margin. So this is the interpreted relationship, generally in the literature, of between the Dras and the GHS. So this field photo on the right here indicates an undeformed Dras volcanic rock. And on the left here, we have one of the deformed metavolcanics that are in the footwall. And so our interpretation, based on the what we would interpret as being the protolith assemblage of the deformed metavolcanics, is that that is similar to the intermediate composition of our Dras volcanic rocks in this particular outcrop. And so these are contiguous across the boundary of the Zanskar Shear zone. So the similarity also there in structural position is informative. So what we think is that the Dras volcanics may be the protolith of the uppermost metavolcanic rocks in Zanskar. So although our observations support they may be correlative, we also appreciate that this needs to be justified further. So one way of doing this is to date the protolith ages of both the volcanics here and their supposed deformed equivalents. If they are the same, this is going to have potential implications for the architecture of the GHS. In particular, sort of, we might need to do a reappraisal on the displacement along the Zanskar Shear zone in the Suru Valley. So now we can highlight some of our key field observations and interpretations I've been through here. So the first one is that thermal peak appears to outlast deformation in the Suru Valley. And what we can see that sort of supports this is, one, that our isograds are locally discordant to lithostratigraphy and to the regional fabric. Secondly is that porphyroblasts from both the metasedimentary and the metavolcanic rocks appear to overgrow the main regional fabric, our S2 fabric. And secondly is that displacement along the Zanskar Shear zone in the Suru Valley may be more limited than some of the previous estimates for the region. And what we can see that might support this is firstly that the degree of normal sense shearing is constrained in map view to a 4 to 5 kilometer thick zone, which contrasts to the other areas of the Himalaya. And secondly is that the Dras volcanics may potentially outcrop on both the footwall and the hanging wall at Sanku, i.e. the western section of my mapped area. So this leads us to some future work we are hoping to continue with for the project. Firstly is, how does peak metamorphism propagate with time? So we're hoping to do some monazite and titanite geochronology and some PT modeling here. So if we expect ages to young to the southwest, we will expect to see that as we move down the structural section away from the Zanskar Shear zone. Secondly would be, how do we restore the geometry of the Zanskar Shear zone so that we get the Dras volcanics on both the hanging wall and the footwall, and what implications does this have for the displacement? And thirdly would be, I hope from this talk I have shown you or convinced you that the Suru Valley is at least a little bit unique when we compare at broad scale to the central and eastern Himalaya. So what implications therefore does this along strike heterogeneity have for the various exhumation mechanisms of the GHS? And so we hope that forthcoming PTT data might help shed some light on this problem. Cool, thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you, Ian, for this interesting talk. You showed some very nice field images and thin section images. And there's a question by Bernardo in the chat. And he's asking, is sillimanite predating kyanite in the summary reconstruction of growth deformation relationships?
No, so I appreciate that that is slightly confusing there. So one interpretation, and I'm just going to show you the field photo here, is that this sillimanite as appears to be both aligned and misaligned to the S2 fabric here. And so that's obviously a bit confusing because the lower grade kyanite and staurolite appears dominantly post-tectonic. So one interpretation here might be that the sillimanite is simply overgrowing or replacing the mica, and the mica would previously define those S2 fabric structures. So we're still working a little bit on peeling apart the relations here between some of the higher grade rocks.
Mm-hmm. And the second question, maybe there's time for one more from Catherine, and there are a few others in the chat, so please have a look afterwards. Yep. And Catherine is asking, great job, Ian, and do you think you can date the shear zone directly?
I think that might be difficult simply based on the mineralogy we get. So we're getting sort of chlorite grade right on the shear zone that's been retrogressive within. So the main work that has been done really to constrain the ages on the shear zone, as I mentioned earlier from the Finch et al. 2014 paper, has been used at looking various phases of leucogranites. And so they've gotten sort of minimum and maximum ages based on phases that cross-cut.
Yeah. Okay.
So I don't think, during the scope of this project, I don't think we will tackle that.
Good. Okay. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you.